Hi, this is Bill from howtovanish.com, and there are actually some situations where you can completely ignore the police. I'm not kidding, you can ignore the police sometimes. It all comes down to understanding the nature of your encounter with the police, because there are some times when you can completely ignore the police, but there are other times when you have to do what they're telling you to do. This all comes about because police recently have been using iris scans to scan and identify the individuals they're talking to on the street. Right now, the database of identified iris scans is not very big, but you can imagine that it's probably growing, and maybe soon most people will have their iris scanned and identified in this database. Now, that kind of search of your eye with an iris scan is probably unconstitutional, unless, of course, the police have a warrant or you give your consent. So obviously, if you can prevent giving your consent, that is one of the best ways to prevent having your iris scanned. Now, to prevent giving consent, you could just say, I don't consent to any iris scans, but there's also some police encounters where you can't necessarily refuse that consent. It all depends on the circumstances that are surrounding your police encounter. And there are three basic levels of police encounter. The first being an encounter where you are free to leave. If a reasonable person would look at the circumstances of the police encounter and feel that they aren't obligated to listen to the police, that they can ignore them and walk away, that's when you can ignore the police. You don't necessarily have to do anything they say in those kinds of police encounters because you don't think you're being stopped. No reasonable person would think they're being stopped by the police. You can carry on your way. There may be a million different scenarios where this happens, but you're just going to have to determine for yourself whether a reasonable person thinks they can leave or not. One way to test whether or not you can ignore the police is to simply ask, am I being detained or am I free to leave? Because the last thing you want to do is make the wrong police officer mad by ignoring them when you probably shouldn't have. That brings us to the next level of police encounter, which is detention. For a police officer to detain you, they have to have a reasonable suspicion based on specific facts that you either have committed a crime or in the process of committing a crime or are going to commit a crime in the future. Detention is not quite as bad as arrest. It's one level below that. And the detention can only last a few minutes, maybe a little bit longer, but it can't last much longer than that. During that time, you might be able to prevent an iris scan, but it might also depend a lot on the state you're in. Some states require you to give your name and maybe identification to a police officer if they ask. But detention is a little bit shorter than an arrest. For a police officer to arrest you, they have to have probable cause to believe you committed a crime. That's a lot higher standard than just reasonable suspicion. If you've been arrested, that's where they can take you downtown, fingerprint you, iris scan you, mugshot you, whatever they want to do. At that point, there is nothing you can do to prevent an iris scan. So if you can keep your police encounters in those free to leave or free to ignore type of encounters, you can keep yourself free from those police iris scans. Even if the police have detained you, you might be able to refuse consent to the iris scan, and they wouldn't be able to do it without a warrant in that case. If you've been arrested, though, there's really nothing you can do, and you're just going to have to submit to the iris scan. But hopefully you know now that there are some situations where you can ignore the police.
This is Bill from howtovanish.com. Use your powers for good.